Welcome to our video on section 8.1, multiplication properties of exponents. This video is going to focus on the product of powers property. Before we talk about the product of powers property, let's do a quick review. This is material that you learned in 7th grade and we reviewed earlier at the beginning of the school year. Okay, let's look at x squared or x times x. In the problem x times x, everybody knows that when I multiply x times x, I'm going to get x squared. Now in chapter 3, when we learned about how to combine like terms, we said that when you combine like terms and did x plus x, you get 2x. Okay, it's important to note and distinguish the difference between adding and multiplying. When I multiply with the same base, as in x times x, I change my exponent. When I add with the same base, as in x plus x, I change my coefficient. It's very important to know when to change the base and when to change the exponent. At any point in chapter 8, if you get confused or lost or frustrated with all of the properties, it's very important to come back to these two very simple and basic examples. All right, let's move on to the product of powers property. In the product of powers property, we're going to be multiplying, that's what product stands for, powers or exponents. So if I look at my first example, 5 squared times 5 to the power of 4. My second example is x cubed times x squared. When we multiply these, I want you to be thinking and looking for a pattern. Okay, x squared times x to the power of 4. I can write x squared as, sorry about that. When you're looking at 5 squared times 5 to the power of 4, I can write 5 squared as 5 times 5 times 5 to the power of 4, which is 5 times 5 times 5 times 5 again. From our last example in our quick review, hopefully it makes sense to you that when I do 5 squared times 5 to the power of 4, or 5 times 5 times 5 times 5 times 5 times 5, we can simplify that and write that as 5 to the power of 6. Now while we're doing the next example, I'd like for you to look for a pattern for how to go from the problem to the answer as 5 to the power of 6 without having to write out all of this work. All right, next example. X cubed times x squared. Well, I can write x cubed as x times x times x times x squared, which is x times x. Okay, again, from my first example in the quick review, hopefully you will understand that x times x times x times x times x can be written as simply x to the power of 5. So right now I'd like for you to take a second to look at the pattern. How can I go from the problem to the answer? All right, in the product of powers property, one important thing that we have to point out is that when you're working with this property, it only works if you have the same base. So hopefully you saw just a second ago that if I multiply with the same base, I can add my exponents to simplify my expression. So 5 squared times 5 to the power of 4, if I add my exponents, 2 plus 4 will give me 6. My second example, if I have x cubed times x squared and I add my exponents, I will get x to the power of 5. I am not going to be expecting everybody to write out their work in this particular manner. You can go right from the problem to this answer in your homework. So again, the product of power properties only works when you have the same base. All right, let's try a few more problems using the pattern. All right, x to the 50th times x to the 110th power. I certainly will not expect you to write this all out, so we can simplify this expression as x to the power of 160. All right, the next problem, 2 to the power of 230 times 2 to the power of 40 can be simplified as 2 to the power of 270. So again, when I have the same base and I'm multiplying, I can add my exponents. Let's try another couple problems. So again, I'm using the product of powers property, but as you can see, I have coefficients with my variables. So in the first problem, 3x squared times 6x to the 7th, I'm going to look at this as 4 separate things. I'm going to refer to this as 3 times x squared times 6 times x to the power of 7. So I'm going to think about this as, like I said, 4 separate things. And I'm going to multiply the things that are the same. So 3 times 6, those are the same because they're coefficients. 3 times 6 is 18. Now I'm going to look at my variables. X squared times x to the 7th. These are the same because they have the same base. So x squared times x to the 7th, I need to think about the product powers of the product powers exponent property that we just talked about. When I'm multiplying, I add my exponents. So my final answer is 18x to the 9th power. All right, one more example here. I have 5c to the 5th d to the 3rd times 10c to the 9th times d. Okay, so I'm going to do the same thing as I did before. I'm going to think of these as 6 different things. 5 times 10, those are my coefficients. I'm going to multiply those. That's 50. C to the 5th times c to the 9th. Again, when I'm multiplying with the same base, I add my exponents. So that's going to be c to the power of 14. And lastly, I have d cubed times d times d. Well, if I don't have anything written for my exponent, we can assume that the exponent is 1. So d to the 3rd times d, I can simplify as d to the power of 4. My final answer is 50 c to the 14th d to the 4th.